Welcome to Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development CropTalk 2020. If you have any questions during this presentation today, please type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu and we will answer them at the end of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to the April 29th edition of Crop Talk. And in this week's Crop Talk, we're going to be looking at spring weed control with Tammy Jones. Tammy comes on almost as a regular on the Crop Talks. It's really good to have her give us some information regarding weeds and weed control. And we're starting to see some of those weeds come up now, so I thought it'd be good to get her on. Then as things dry up a little more, we're going to be seeing producers in the field, and I think one of the things that's going to happen is we're going to see a lot of peas being planted in the next week to 10 days, and thought it'd be a good time to get Amir Farouk on, and he's going to give us some tips on planting peas and talk a little bit about inoculation and some of the things we could look at when we're inoculating the peas. A little bit of an update before we get into Tammy's presentation. We did receive some rainfall this past week throughout most of the province, anywhere from 10 to 15 millimeters, and there was definitely some heavier showers in some areas. I did get some people talking anywhere from half to 3/4 of an inch in some places, and it really made things wet again. There was guys before the rainfall were out there and looking at fertilizing, looking at actually doing some tillage to clean up some ruts. And after this little bit of a rainfall event we had, there's water laying in a lot of places that didn't seem to have water before. So I think this has definitely put a lot of guys on hold for the last 5 to 10 days. Still talking to producers that are fertilizing their forage land. This morning would be a great morning to be out there doing that. We had a really good frost last night and the ground is pretty firm this morning, so I imagine some guys are going again this morning. And like I mentioned, most producers are saying it's too wet to get started seeding. Doing some soil temperatures over the last few days, and we're seeing in that top 5 centimeters anywhere from 2 degrees to 4 degrees Celsius. So you know, I guess if it was dry enough to go, we could be looking at getting our peas in the ground for sure. Still a little on the cool side for some of the other crops, but with some of the forecasts coming up here with the warm days ahead, we're going to probably see the soil temperatures rise fairly fast. And as that happens, the weeds are going to start growing a lot faster too. So I guess with that, we'll turn the presentation over to Tammy and we'll get right into talking about weeds.
Okay, so I guess that means I should unmute myself and probably share a screen. Okay, hopefully that looks good for everyone.
You bet.
All right, Lionel knows this about me and maybe most of you do as well. I usually have too many slides and too little time. So 48 slides in 30 minutes or less, this should be fun. Spring is a great time to be looking for weeds. Clearly, that's what the goal is. And the problem is that we're not looking at flowers or seeds typically, and maybe the seeds, but we're definitely looking at cotyledons, sometimes some true weeds, and then I really do rely on vegetative structures when I'm looking for weed ID. We don't want to wait for flowering, especially if we're making a decision on some pre-seed herbicide options, for instance. So weed characteristics for ID include leaf shape, leaf margins, the vein patterns, your structure, the arrangement of leaves. In the spring, a little bit challenging with the arrangement of leaves, typically because with most winter annuals, we're looking at rosettes, so we can't really tell whether they're alternate or opposite. So that one kind of goes out the window. And we start to look at things like life cycle, whether it's an annual, biennial, or perennial. Typically, that's pretty easy to see because bigger plants probably are a perennial or a biennial rather than an annual or a winter annual. The roots, the rhizomes, and the underground structures end up giving us more clues than not at this time of the year. And so I really recommend when we're going out there for scouting tools that we have a hand lens, but just as important as a trowel to dig up those plants, take a look at the roots, and it gives you some great keys on what you might be actually looking at if the weeds are a little bit beaten up. So the first family that I wanted to look at is the mustard family, and these are two that we see all of the time. The one on the left is stinkweed, the one on the right is shepherd's purse. At this size, very, very easy to tell the difference. And especially if you look closely at the leaves, stinkweed has no hairs, whereas if we look closer at shepherd's purse, we can start to see that there are hairs. But we can also, this is a picture of some shepherd's purse that I actually have growing in the office here, and you can see that when I dug it up, some snow events and some frosts have beaten up those leaves, so a little bit more challenging to take a look at. We can start to see that there's hairs on the shepherd's purse leaves, whereas the stinkweed wouldn't have any. And then as it gets a little bit older, we start to see sort of like a star-shaped pattern with those hairs, and that's because there's 5 hairs coming out at each one of those spots to sort of make up that star shape. So shepherd's purse, very distinctive in these pictures because of really deep lobing, but you don't always see that lobing on those leaves. So then looking for hairs versus the smell of stinkweed, and some people like the smell, say it's more like a garlicky smell, and some people don't like the smell because it's fairly sulfur. So depending on who you are, you either like stinkweed or you don't. But in the fields that I've been in, I've definitely seen that those rosettes are getting to a stage where it's important to start thinking about controlling them. Another one in the mustard family that does tend to come up fairly early is possibly this one. And I get a little bit worried about identifying at this stage, just because once you get the true leaves out, it's very easy to tell the difference between, say, wild mustard and volunteer canola. But at this stage, really, really challenging because no hairs are really visible, and it makes it a little bit more of a skill. So at this point in time, I'm starting to see more hairs on those true leaves, and my suspicion would be that it's actually wild mustard. And especially on this one over here, I can start to see that. This one is still fairly small. So, but if we get even just a little bit bigger, especially in the southwest corner of the province, I see quite a bit of wild mustard, and it does tend to usually be a more yellow-green color, but a very hairy plant as well. And it doesn't take long to get enough leaves to differentiate. Whereas volunteer canola, in the pictures, tends to look like this. But here's my reality. This is what I'm finding because this is what I dug up. And again, you see that volunteer canola beaten up, and those leaves that are yellowing and dying, probably not really great for herbicide uptake, whereas those new leaves that are emerging would be very good for herbicide uptake. So maybe waiting a couple more days until these grow a little bit more would be a better time for actual herbicide application if that's what you were looking at. Okay, this one is one that I'm seeing in my field. This particular picture over here is from a cornfield that I have. And you can notice that here it's more of a green color versus a blue-gray almost color in this particular picture. That does depend on growing conditions somewhat. Both of these pictures are flicksweed. And again, at this point in time with flicksweed, hard to tell whether that's alternate or opposite, but it is that basal rosette. And it's starting to get to a stage where I would want to control it because it's easier to control when it's small than after it gets a bit bigger and starts bolting and then flowering and sets seed on you. So seize the moment, I guess, for flickweed. But here's some more pictures that are important. You can see elongated cotyledon and then very distinctive first leaves on flickweed, 3-lobed. It's the only one where it's just going to have 3 lobes. After that, you start to get into the finely divided, pinnately divided leaves. This is one that I get every spring. It's yellow whitlow grass. And this is not my favorite picture. It is because you can see that it is part of the brassica family. It's got the 4-petaled flower. And at this time of the year, we're getting dangerously close to it already blooming. I prefer these pictures because they give you an idea of the size of the weed. And so I put a penny in here beside the whitlow grass. It's got a very fuzzy, hairy leaf. It is a winter annual. It's easier to control in the fall because by early in the spring, you can start to see the distinctive little brassica pods coming out. and it's already starting to set seed. It's typically not very competitive, so it doesn't generally need to be controlled, but it is something that most of the time in the spring you're going to find some, and glyphosate should give you some control, but because it doesn't last long, it's really not a competitor with most crops. It's usually died off before it's ever going to compete with a crop and cause yield loss. The other one that gets confused with it quite often is this one, which is pygmy flower. Pygmy flower, compared to yellow whitlow grass, has white blooms, 5 petals on the bloom, no leaves on the flower stalk, and you can see that it sort of has this little gathering point, and then all of the flowers come off of there. More obvious in this particular picture, also called fairy candelabra, which is a very lovely name, but pygmy flower is what we see. So leafless hairless leaves. Wow, let's go with hairless leaves. And again, very early maturing, white flowers instead of yellow flowers, which you see with the whitlow grass. Then we get into some that are a tiny bit harder to differentiate, and there's lots of options in the composite family for early emerging weeds. The really unfortunate part is that when you start to try and key them out, if you look at something that has a round cotyledon, which is up here at the top, and it's got a first or second true leaf that's toothed or wavy and a bit of a round to almost oval shape. Even if you look into the third, fourth, and fifth leaves, and they're elongated and toothed or wavy, and they're all in a rosette, it could still be perennial sow thistle, smooth perennial sow thistle, annual sow thistle, spiny annual sow thistle, prickly lettuce, or dandelion at this point in time. There just isn't a lot of differentiation between those particular weeds as far as keying them out. So one of your best resources is actually knowing what weeds were an issue the year before, and then, like I mentioned earlier, your trowel to be able to dig them up, see the root structure. It'll help you a ton in identifying them. So Canada thistle does set a lot of seed, but I'll be honest, you don't see a lot of cotyledons. You tend to see plants that are already at this, or maybe even just 2 or 3 leaves at this point in time, because we didn't get a lot of fall work done as well. Very likely to see Canada thistle in this particular stage. It's more prickly than some of the other composite families, so that also helps you out, but that root structure will definitely be an indicator that you're looking at Canada thistle in addition to those aggressively prickly leaves. Perennial sow thistle, not quite as prickly, not as mean when you're trying to pull it out, which is why I prefer it, but it does tend to have the same kind of idea for a root structure down below. You will see that there is patches of perennial sow thistle similar to Canada thistle, but if you look at those younger rosettes, they are much less indented on the leaf and much less prickly than, say, Canada thistle. Annual sow thistle, if it were to emerge, is going to emerge a little bit later. You're probably looking later into May, early June kind of thing. So we shouldn't see it early, and it shouldn't be something that we confuse with it, because at the end of the day, it has a taproot instead of a spreading root structure, and therefore digging it up and looking at that will help you with identification. Dandelion, I think this is the one that we're seeing the most of right now, and in all sorts of stages, everywhere from just starting to emerge, because seed production does work as a very effective mechanism for spread, to smaller rosettes. This, I would say, is more typical of what you see in the field, sort of growing underground. It's got a nice deep taproot, and then even this, where we've already got that flower head and a bud here, those are possible to see as early as now, just because they take advantage of that lovely early moisture and whatever warmth we do accumulate. One that I like to try and get early would be this one, which is biennial wormwood. Tend to see it in clumps, to be honest, because each plant sets about 1 million seeds. It has just round, boring cotyledons. This first true leaf is definitely an indicator of biennial wormwood. And the reason that I like to look at it and try and get it early is because the only time that glyphosate is really very effective on biennial wormwood is really early. There are not a lot of pre-emergent products that actually work well on biennial wormwood, and there are not a lot of in-crop options either, especially in something like soybean, that have any efficacy. So really early applications of glyphosate tend to be the best way. And if we look at it a little bit later, again, we can start to see that first true leaves are quite distinctive, and then after that it starts to become more finely divided. Typically in a small rosette, the one that is sometimes confused with is common ragweed, the difference being that biennial wormwood is a very serrated leaf, whereas ragweed is a lobed leaf. So think kitchen knife for cutting bread, serrated, versus almost a spoon as far as the lobing, right? So important to know that difference as well. Narrow-leaf hawksbeard. So Sheila Elder took this picture and sent it to me on Twitter just a couple of days ago. So we do know that the narrow-leaf hawksbeard is having a heck of a good time out there. These are really healthy rosettes, obviously overwintered and doing great. It will start to elongate not very long from now. And then you can see that with narrow-leaf hawksbeard, there are leaves that actually are on the flower stem and then clusters of blooms. So quite a bit different looking than, say, annual sow thistle, and also different than, well, larger than, say, a pygmy flower or a yellow whitlow grass. Canada fleabane is one that we don't see a lot of, but it's one that I do want to just mention briefly because it is a winter annual and it is one that they see lots of problems with in Ontario, and I expect someday that Canada fleabane is going to love it here as well. Very, very hairy leaves. This is an overwintered rosette, so lots of purpling on those older leaves. As it greens up, those leaves start to elongate and those teeth tend to be less defined. It almost gets smooth looking, but it does stay hairy. The stem is hairy as well. So a little bit different than, say, a narrow-leaf hawksbeard that doesn't have those hairs. And obviously the leaf shape is very different here too. Winter annual cleavers seem to be increasingly a problem. So cleavers have a square stem. They feel like, oh shoot, you know, they're sticky. Velcro, there's the word I was looking for. Wow, brain part this morning. Anyway, you can see the cotyledons, fairly oval, a little bit of a notch in the tip in this perfect cotyledon that was grown in a greenhouse setting. The problem is that when you get out into the field, sometimes that tip of that cotyledon is very, very challenging to see if there's a notch or whatever. So that becomes a bit of a problem. But once you get into this, where it's a whorl of leaves, so 3 or more leaves at a node, whorl, then you're at cleavers, okay? And you do need to know how to stage by those whorls because cleavers outgrow the staging on most herbicide labels very, very quickly. So selection of an appropriate herbicide is important with cleavers. The goosefoot family is the other one that we're starting to see more and more of, and Lionel sent me a couple of pictures that I'll show you later. They may accumulate salts, but typically they're just more tolerant of those salty areas. So your saline areas start to see things like the maple leaf goosefoot, oak leaf goosefoot, or lamb's quarters, which tends to start emerging about this time of year. And then the one that we all know and love, kochia. So these pictures are from a couple of years ago, thankfully. I haven't seen anything quite this bad yet this year, but it does grow very rapidly, very hairy, fuzzy little kochia plants. At about this stage, so this first one, there are lots of chemistries that start to become ineffective on kochia. So we know that in Manitoba, 59% of our kochia populations have some level of glyphosate resistance. At this stage, we're probably pushing the limits for something like a bromoxynil application to do really well, and we need to start to be looking at what other tank add-ins can we use. If we get to this stage, you're very challenged to be able to control it, and well, this stage, we're too far gone. I think everyone knows what kochia looks like. I don't need to worry about it too much. Within the pink family, I'm not going to focus on this too much. It's opposite leaves and a round stem. The ones that we're looking at this time of year, night flowering catchfly and white cockle. If we look at them, they do tend to look more similar than what these pictures show. So night flower and catchfly can have a broadleaf as well. They're both hairy, they're both opposite. They can both act as an annual, but then night flower and catchfly will act as a winter annual. Differentiating between a winter annual versus a biennial sometimes is very challenging. It's a white cockle. If you dig it up and you start to see you're into more of a well-developed root structure, its chances are white cockle. But knowing your field history is going to help out a lot, because when we say sticky, I tend to notice the stickiness really on the blooms more than anything, and it's very challenging earlier on. If we look at the cotyledons on night flower and catchfly, they do tend to have a little bit more of a petiole than what white cockle does. But again, if you don't have the two of them to compare to each other, very challenging to look at. Once we get into this bloom stage, you can start to see all that wax on the bloom and even a fly that's been caught in there, but we're not wanting to wait till then. So if we look at the white cockle, the cotyledon, definitely less of a stalk or a petiole on that cotyledon, which is important. But at this stage of a rosette, very challenging to tell the difference between your night flower and catchfly and your white cockle. And so the growth stage of the plant might help you out. Once we get to the bloom stage, again, that's a female white cockle flower, and very distinctive because it's got such a big seed pod that's already developing at that stage. Bladder campion is another one that is a biennial. Completely different, no hairs on the leaves, much waxier, and just a different color to it, so don't usually mistake that one in there. The buckwheat family, so there's a few that we can see early on. The cotyledons can be at about a 120 degree. This ochrea is something, once you get into third, fourth leaf, very distinctive, and you can start to see that easily as well. I think this is what we notice most of the time right now. You know, those 120 degree cotyledons, very long, nice oval shape to them, and then the very distinctive first leaf on the wild buckwheat. And with spring, this will be probably a little bit more red. This must have been a June picture of a wild buckwheat that was emerging, but I tend to see this emerging second leaf as having a lot more red on it, at least this spring, just because it has been a bit cooler and we've had some snow and stuff like that. Roundleaf mallow, once you get heart-shaped cotyledons, that's a key tip. The other thing is that those little cheeses or the little seed wheels tend to not break apart all that well, so then you tend to get quite a number of them emerging all at the same time. And then once you get into the leaf being this round, wrinkled, crinkled kind of look, then you know that you've got roundleaf mallow. Again, another one that's really challenging to control, not a lot of great options for it, so hitting it hard early on is great. Stork's bill, highly identifiable cotyledons. It will throw out a little rosette, but tends to be fairly identifiable as well. And also, as it gets larger, much more challenging to control. So small weeds, easy to control. That's why our pre-seed herbicides are so important. The last one that I wanted to bring up was redroot pigweed. And the reason that I beat this horse is because I think everyone knows redroot pigweed. The one that I want them to be looking for is water hemp. And I expect that it won't start to germinate until mid-May, whereas redroot pigweed will start earlier. But I did want to notice the difference in the shape of the cotyledons. Really challenging if you don't have them side by side or you haven't looked at this slide about a million times. But your redroot pigweed, which is on the left, is an oval, not really broad shoulders or anything like that on these cotyledons, versus water hemp, where you've got more of almost a diamond. It's got these shoulders and then a taper to the point. So important if you're seeing a new patch of pigweed somewhere that you're looking at that. And again, I've got a dime in there to try and give you some scale as far as what size of plant I'm looking at. Okay, so here's some pictures that Lionel took. These ones are small. You can tell based on the straw and everything that's around it that this is small. This is the pygmy flower that I showed earlier. They're challenged to try and bring into focus. So sometimes, yeah, that's a struggle. The struggle is real, but it's such a distinctive looking shape to it that I can tell you right away that it's pygmy flower. We've got no hairs, and just the way this flower cluster is going to work out. Okay, so don't sweat the small stuff sometimes when you're sending in ID. I can sometimes be able to tell you based on emergence and when it is and what it looks like, vague shapes, what kind of a weed you're looking at. So feel free to text in pictures, and they don't need to be perfect. Now this one was a little bit more of a challenge for me. I assume based on timing, it's not foxtail barley because it's not blue-green enough, and I should have put a quackgrass and a foxtail barley comparison in here for you. But here's a quackgrass picture. You can see that there was grass growing there last year and that this is re-emerging from there. If you dig it up, the easy thing here is quackgrass is going to have rhizomes all over the place. Foxtail barley, it's just a fibrous root system right under that foxtail barley. And so super easy to tell the difference between those two. Just yank it out, do the free weed control. This is a dandelion as far as I'm concerned. Just you can start to see those flat veins in there. Not very much indentation at this point in time, but again, you're looking at a fairly small plant. And it looks like this is from last fall. So lots of different indicators there. We can see some other little pygmy flowers and some more. Looks like quackgrass, but it's very small to be able to tell that. Now, this picture, Lionel sent to brag about finding a dead grasshopper and that we must have had some winter kill or something. But I really wanted to focus in on the fact that we've got a nice mat of kochia coming here. And if we haven't got this seeded soon, that kochia is going to take over and we are going to have some challenges as far as trying to control that depending on what crop's going in there. So another little pygmy flower, but these kochia were the ones that really interested me in this picture. Okay, and then Lionel wanted to talk about some of our pre-seed control options and maybe what we could look at and what works and what doesn't. There are a lot of herbicides to control emerge weeds before seeding or after seeding. And so it depends on the crop. It depends on whether you're doing purely pre-seed, pre-emerge. This is only to 8. There's a whole long list beyond this. And there's a couple of new ones that'll get added on in the Guide to Crop Protection Addendum. So this is an ever-evolving list, and I didn't want to go into specifics. I did want to focus on a couple of things. So staging is important. So if you're looking at cleavers, for instance, and you're looking at some of the options that are out there, especially a bromoxynil type of thing, you're looking at 2 inches or less. So you need to be cognizant of the staging of your weeds so that you get the right thing or make the right choice, pardon me. You also need to be aware of what kind of resistance you're looking at. The other thing that's important to think about is whether you need some residual control. So if you're doing a tank mix of glyphosate with one of these, what kind of extended control are you getting? So say Authority, for instance, you're going to get extended control versus an aim or a clean start, which is just burning it off and not putting in extended control. So I think it's too complicated to give you generalizations right now. And the other part of it is you're probably not dealing with just one weed. You're looking at a bunch of different weeds. So figure out what your 2, 3, 4, 5 driver weeds are. And then if you can't find something on your own, feel free to ask someone within our network as far as what some of the recommendations might be. The other point is that spring herbicide applications are not stress-free. We always have these frost periods. You know, the ground is firm this morning, which is great because we can usually spray before we can get in to do tillage, and our weed staging is fantastic, but is it too cold? So there are some rules of thumb out there. They're not perfect, but they tend to be things that you need to kind of consider. So if we've had a frost of like -4, that'll usually do some pretty good damage to annual weeds, but you have to keep in mind, like think back to that picture that Lionel gave of the kochia where there's straw protecting it and everything else. Did it get to -4 at that weed, or was it just -4 somewhere higher above and that weed was protected? So you got to think through some of that as well. And so again, if we're at -4, -5, -6, you might see that there is some hardening off on some of those annual weeds. You need to give them a couple of days so that they start to regrow. If it's a winter annual, they're very cold tolerant. You probably need something like a -10 before you're going to have some hardening off of that weed. So as long as you have good, healthy green leaf material, and lots of those pictures showed healthy green leaf material, then I think you're going to have good efficacy with your herbicides. With systemic herbicides, 8 degrees Celsius for 2 hours for a couple of days will help to ensure that those sugars are moving through those plants, that the herbicide is getting to the site of action, and it's actually doing what it needs to do. With contact herbicides, it's a little bit different. You need to have good growing conditions at the time that you're spraying so that it will do the job right then, because it doesn't translocate. So if it doesn't get into the plant and control it at the time of application, it doesn't do as good of a job. So think about getting into the double digits before you start looking at contact herbicides. This is an old rule of thumb for overnight temperatures and pre-seed applications from Dow AgroSciences, so that gives you an idea of where I've stole it and how old it is. And I also wanted to put in a different sprayer picture so that you didn't think I liked one color versus another. So at 0 degrees, spray once your temperatures are +5 and rising. If we had -2 to -5, make sure that you get to that 8 degrees, just like we mentioned, but you want it to be rising for a minimum of 2 to 4 hours. If it got below that 5 degrees, again, like I said, this just summarizes everything I just said. Wait for 1 to 2 days of overnight lows that are 0 degrees or warmer, and that you're getting into that 8 degrees plus during the day, okay? The other thing that I wanted to mention before I wrap up within my 30 minutes is that we have made a digital copy of the Weed Seedling ID Guide. We've got it, it's out of print. The last time it was printed was in 2008. So what we've done is scanned in that PDF. It is a searchable PDF. It is online. Just search for Weed Seedling Identification Guide Manitoba. It'll take you to the link. And when you click on here, it'll take you to the digital copy. If you've misplaced yours or you just want to take a look at something, there's 58 photographs and lots of good description in there that can help you out. Also, if you want to just text me or email me, there's my contact information as far as weed ID or random interesting recommendations on how to control specific weeds, because I didn't go into that. I just think it's more complex than what I can do in the 30 minutes. And with that, I'll turn it over or open it up to questions, whatever you prefer.
Okay, you've answered one of them right at the last few slides there about temperatures. That one came in regarding cool temperatures and spraying, so that was good that you answered that one. Another one that came in is where are we sitting with water hemp in the province? Whereabouts are the hot spots, I guess, and is it through the province or just in certain areas?
Well, to date, we have seen it in mainly central and eastern Manitoba. The problem with that generalization is that if we look at North Dakota, water hemp is from border to border south of us in North Dakota for detection, and it does move by water, it does move by equipment, it does move by a bunch of different mechanisms. So for me to say, oh, I don't think you need to worry about it in Western Manitoba would be ridiculous. Surveillance is key. But that being said, Dufferin, Rhineland, and then further east into Whitemouth and St. Anne, Taché, those types of areas is where we have seen it typically. It just is something that we didn't expect to see 6 municipalities in 2020. We have seen significant moisture in North Dakota, and so the chance of there having been some seed enter the waterways and potentially move into Manitoba is quite high. And so looking in your potholes, looking in your ditches, looking where you may have had even a little bit of overland flooding makes a lot of sense this year, just to make sure that we're finding it where as early as we can before it becomes an established population and we have more expenses and more challenges in controlling it.
Okay, and that's all the questions I have. I'm just going to quickly check with Lori to see if there was anything else.
No, I don't see anything.
Okay.
Thank you for the
Good.
opportunity.
Well, thanks, Jeremy.
Okay.
Thanks, Tammy. It was a great presentation, lots of good pictures and great explanations. I think that's probably not why there wasn't as many questions. So anyways, great presentation. Thanks again.
Thanks for the chance.
You bet. So now what we'll do is we'll turn it over to Amir, and let's talk about planting peas and some tips on planting peas and a little bit about inoculation. So if you're ready, Amir, take it away.
Lionel, can you see my screen?
Yeah, if you just want to put it at full screen, that would be good. Perfect.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amir Farooq. I work as a farm production extension specialist in crops and especially in pulses in the western side of the province. So today I will talk about some tips for the pea production and some inoculation as well. So this is the little bit background from the last year, from the growing season 2019. The yield across the province was close to 50 bushels per acre on average, with highs of 80 bushels per acre in Swan River region, because in that area there was some very exceptional yields. And 2019 proved once again that field peas are very water use efficient, because we have some shortage of water in some critical times, but peas proves again that they are very good water use efficient crop. And there was no significant yield differences between Red River Valley and Western Manitoba. Both regions did well. So overall, yield was very good. So this is a map from Manitoba Agriculture Services Corporation, like crop insurance. In this map, we can see that most of the acres of peas, they are scattered in all over the province, but the major share for the seeding area is mostly in the western side of the province and in the north side, especially in the Swan River area. So this means that in the western side, in this Brandon and this area, west side of the Portage, there is a big potential for this crop. And with this new marketing opportunities, so farmers have good option and good crop in their crop rotation. This is just another slide about the in last 5 to 10 years, like 10-year average is 41 bushels per acre and 5-year average is 43 bushels per acre. And we can see here the yield in different years and the acreage in different years. So 2016 was the biggest year when we have more than 160,000 acres of the peas, and then there was a little bit decline. But from last year we have again acres are projecting, and hopefully this year we are thinking it should be close to 150,000 acres this year. Next I will talk about what makes a good launch for the peas. So these are the two pictures taken by our colleague Terry Buss. So right side is the these are from the research plots when he was working in Alberta. So in this we can see here in the right side is the good launch and the nice field, and the left side we can see a lot of bare field, and this is not a very good launch. So we should be very careful when we are seeding peas. So we should first of all, for good launch is a good location. Like in this field, picture is also from Terry Buss. We can see here this is the very bad combination of heavy clay soil, poor drainage, and too much summer rainfall, because peas don't like very heavy moisture. So for peas we need well drained coarse texture soil, and little bit drier side, those soils which is little bit drier side, they will be best for the peas. And so we should be keep in mind. And second thing, when we are selecting the field, we should take in mind the herbicide carryover, because peas are not very good for the residual herbicide competition. So we should keep in mind and we should check the history of that field when we are deciding the field for pea seeding. For next, good launch is the right seeding time. So we are exact in the time of seeding. This is the best time, and we see here the first week of May. This is the maximum yield we can get, and when we are going to later in the May and in the first week of June, so the field pea yield is declining very quick. So because peas should be the first crop going in the field, and they are very much frost tolerant crop as compared to other crops as canola and soybean and other crops, because their growing point is the underground. So for that reason we can see peas as a first crop in most of western Manitoba. And secondly, seeding early is the thing, because we can avoid heat when peas are flowering, because during flowering time we need some good temperature. Next, for good launch, we need right plant stand. So ideal plant stand is established 75 to 85 plants per meter square. It translates in 7 to 8 plants per foot square. So uniform stands of 5 to 6 plants per square feet are also capable of producing acceptable yields. So provided you have good weed control and everything else goes right. If we have 5 to 6 plant per square feet, so we should take some extra care. We can still get some good potential of yield, but the best we should be 7 to 8 plants per square feet is the best. But if we have low plant population, it will be poor weed control, and we should not get the help from the crop, because we have already very thin plant stand, and poor standability also, plants too far apart to interlock, and it will be effect on your flowering. So next, this is the picture for the hula hoop, because the scouting is the best thing during the season. After seeding our crop, we should go into the field during germination and check our plant stand. So this is hula hoop you can buy from any Dollarama store. So this is best thing. We should check the diameter of 28 and quarter inches. So then you can just multiply with 10,000 and you can get the exact your number of plants. So from here we can see here the hula hoop plant count 30 to 31, and it plants per acre is 300,000, and then plant per square feet is 7, and plant per meter square is 75 per meter square. So this is the best way to check our plant stand during the season. So I will recommend that we should, every farmer and every agronomist should do this practice. It will give you the best plant stand and also idea for your crop. For next is good launch is high quality seed, because last year some producers they actually harvested their crop at that time there was very dry conditions. So if seed is very dry, or this picture is from Dennis Lang, so we can see here there are some like damaged seed coat in this sample. So if there will be a lot of seed coat is damaged, so it can affect your germination. So to check the seed coat damage, this is a quick test. This is called soak test. So we can just take some water and put the seed for 4 to 5 minutes there, and then you can check that how your seed coat is working on the seed. So we can use this for soybean seed, for pea seed, and so this is very good practice, and you can check the your seed quality. And next for good launch is good nodulation, because if your crop has good nodules, you can get the maximum of the fertilizer, maximum fertility, and you can get the maximum of crop. So this is the table you can see here for average pea nutrient removal rates. So 110 pounds per acre to get the 50 bushels per acre field pea crop, we need 117 pounds per acre of nitrogen. So more than 50% nitrogen pea plant gets through the nodulation. So good nodulation we can get through good inoculation. So what is a pea inoculate? Inoculate pea with Rhizobium leguminosarum bacteria even on fields with a history of peas to facilitate root nodule development and biological nitrogen fixation. So consider double inoculating fields with no history of peas or using a granular inoculant when seeding conditions are unfavorable, especially if there is dry conditions or excess moisture or acidic soils. So what are the factors which can affect the nodulation? So using the wrong species of Rhizobium, because every pulse crop has their own Rhizobium bacteria, their own special inoculant. So we should use for pea, so pea inoculant that is specially for made for the pea crop. So for the crop seeded or using inadequate rates of inoculant. So for that, calibrate seeding equipment using inoculated seed, and it may have slower flow rates than seed that has been not inoculated. And second thing which can affect delays between inoculation and seeding. The bacteria die rapidly when exposed to temperature extremes and drying conditions. Ideally, inoculate only enough seed that can be planted within 6 hours. Under cool, dark storage conditions, bacteria can survive on seed for about 1 to 2 days. Depending on the inoculant formulation, any further delay will require retreating. So we should always check the manufacturer's recommendations, because there are some inoculants which can survive only for 6 hours. So it's very important that when we are buying inoculant, we should check the manufacturer's recommendations and check with the dealer. So what are their recommendations? And next factors which can affect the nodulations and also dry soil during the first 2 weeks after seeding can lead to drying out. Desiccation means drying out of the inoculant and death of the Rhizobium. So shallow seeding as also another factor. If the optimum seeding depth is 1.5 to 2 inches. So if we are seeding very shallow, so it can also dry out the Rhizobium. And third thing is high levels of available nitrogen. If there is already, we have 55 kilogram nitrogen per hectare or 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre, we have already in the soil. So it can cause also effect on the nodulations, because we have already a lot of nitrogen and those inoculant will not work properly. And another thing, low available phosphate levels can also seedling development, slow the seedling development and reduce the ability of the plant to fix the nitrogen. So most of people think that for pulse crops we don't need any fertilizer. This is not true. We need all kind of fertilizers but less nitrogen. Most of these inoculants, they can provide you the nitrogen fixation, but we have to still put some other fertilizers as well. So we should be very careful about phosphate and some other nutrients as well. So just some precautions about the granular inoculants. The granular inoculants must not be mixed with granular fertilizer. Granular inoculants are subject to moisture buildup within the seeder tank that leads to bridging and compaction. To avoid bridging, tanks should not be filled more than 1/2 full and product should not be transported in the tank. If granular products are left in the tank overnight, considerable condensation can occur that can result in reduced flowability and plugging. So therefore, ensure that the tank is aerated, lid should be open and kept out of direct sunlight and heat. Always follow the manufacturer's direction. So these are some directions. There are different kind of inoculants available in the market. So whichever you are using, please always check the manufacturer directions and check with the dealer, because these all inoculants are very sensitive and mostly inoculants are very costly. This is not a cheap thing, so it's good to always be checked. And next, one thing which I will mention for the good launch is herbicide timing. We should very careful, because to get the good crop our weed control should be on time. So the best timing for the herbicide is 1 to 6 nodes. So the nodes in this particular field, there are different stages of the plant. There are some plants, they are like 2 to 3 nodes, and there are some plants, they have already 5 to 6 nodes. So it should be very careful. We should scout the field and not just sitting in the truck outside of the field and just make assumption that my plants are very small yet, or it's not that stage. Sometimes they go very fast. So weed control, a pea plant can produce 2 nodes in 7 days under optimum conditions. If you are using a post-emergent product, know the correct node stage of the pea plant for safe application. Most broadleaf weed control products perform best at the 2 to 5 node stage above the ground. Spray early to remove weed competition, because every week if we are delaying spray for weed control, we are losing yield. So it's very important we should go on time in the field and start to checking the weeds and also to control those weeds as soon as possible. This is actually the growth staging guide. From here we can say there is some scale node as well. So we should be very careful that in this peas staging, growth stages are different than soybean and other crops. So this is very good actually spreadsheet sheet from the Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Growers Association. This is available in most of our offices as well, but you can go online and check this. So you can find this very valuable resource when you are doing some herbicide spray or some other growth staging. So this is our information. Dennis Lang is our specialist, and this is me and Terry Buss and Nicole Clausen. She works in Swan River. So because we have a lot of acres in that area, so if there will be any question, please let us know. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, Amir, a couple questions for you. When is the best time to check if inoculation is working?
The best time is when the plant is 6 to 8 nodes at that time. So if you should dig the plant, don't pull the plant, because if you will pull the plant, you can just kill your nodules as well. And dig the plant carefully, and then you can wash the roots and check the nodules at that time. And if and then you can just cut the nodule, and if those nodules are pink from inside, it means your inoculant is working. And if there is some conditions, some environmental conditions, some other conditions, it's not working, so then maybe you can use some rescue nitrogen till 9 to 12 stage node stage of the crop. So
Okay, how much phosphate is safe to put in the seed row? Did you hear that, Amir?
yes, mostly phosphorus is if you want to put, mostly phosphorus is using in the prior for the seeding of the pulse crop, because that will be the best thing to use that. Because mostly those crops are using when you are putting in the fall, so that will be the best time. I am not sure that how much will be the effect for peas if you are putting in the rows. I'm not 100% sure about that.
Okay, we're going to have John Hurd on here right away. He might be able to maybe address that a little bit too. Another one is the recommendation the same for field peas as soybeans for new growers to double inoculate new fields?
Can you repeat the question?
Is the recommendation the same for field peas as soybeans for new growers to double inoculate new fields?
Yes, exactly. If they are growing in the, so it always recommended that you should try to put double inoculate.
Okay.
And I just got the answer that it's 10 to 15 pounds of phosphorus is safe if you are putting with the seed.
Okay, so 10 to 15 pounds of phosphate in the seed row.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks, Amir. I will get Lori to turn the screen over to me, and we have one new announcement to make here. Okay, so one of the things we're looking at implementing over the next little while here is, and actually to start in next week, is the crop scouting panel. And what it will do is it'll give you the ability of to ask on a weekly basis the crew of specialists that we have throughout the province that could answer questions or see things that are happening in their regular work that they could bring to this the webinar. And we have John Hurd on today, and John is one of the guys that has been working with me to get this thing going. So John, maybe I'll get you to maybe introduce the panel and maybe talk a little bit about what we're planning on doing here.
Okay, sure. Thanks a lot, Lionel. Yeah, the opportunity that we want to put forward here is that we have quite a number of specialists in the province here that are willing to tackle some questions as they come in, as they're sent in advance. Some we can respond to live as they are typed into your CropTalk. And our option is to provide fairly quick response to questions. Later, we will supplement that. John Gavlowski's crop pest report comes out later that same day and should also answer several of those questions. So the panel is Ann Kirk, our cereal specialist, Dane Fraze, our oilseed, Dave Kaminsky's our plant pathologist for field crops, Dennis Lang, the pulse specialist, John Gavlowski, of course, our entomologist, myself in soil fertility, Marla in soil health, and we heard earlier today, Tammy is our weed specialist. So we feel pretty confident that we can tackle and either offer a suggestion or an opinion on some of the questions that are coming in and are current starting next week. But not all panelists may be available. A lot of them have time to spend in the field, but we will try to tackle whatever you're throwing at us, Lionel.
Okay, and this is how we are hoping that it'll run. Like John mentioned, the panel will provide answers and comments during the week. If you have questions that you'd like the panel to answer, if you could submit them in advance would be great. We could, if you could have a photo, that would even be better. And if you could send them to Lori, and there's her email address, or myself with my email address, and we will get them to the panel, and they'll be prepared to answer them for the coming week. And like John mentioned as well, like as we're going through, we get live questions typed in all the time. And so again, that would be something that would be available for everybody to do. If they have questions, they could type them in as we're going. So I think this is a great opportunity. It'll give everyone the ability to talk to our specialists on a weekly basis, and I think it'll keep everything going as what's happening across the province. I guess is what I was trying to say, and we can see different things going on and different issues in different areas. So I think it's a good opportunity to use this staff, and I'm glad that John came up with the idea. So any other comments, John? We're planning on starting next Wednesday, so we'll be waiting for questions and ready to go.
Yeah, no comment other than our two specialists today that spoke did a great job on answering those questions. And Amir's right on. Phosphorus is important, and our limit's about 15 pounds per acre, 20 pounds if you're braver, depending on situations. So good answers.
Great, thanks, John. Okay, just a few more slides before we end off the day. Reminder that Tammy was talking about weeds and about all the different products that are available for controlling weeds. Well, the book is getting bigger every year, and it's available at the offices. So if you're interested in the book, contact the office and we'll make sure we get it to you one way or the other. The seasonal crop reports are going to be starting next week. So again, if you're interested in the reports, sign up at Manitoba Ag, click onto the online resources and you'll be getting updates. Also follow Manitoba Ag on Twitter. There's going to be a lot of information put out there by through our Manitoba Ag Twitter account. And if you're looking for information regarding videos and other information being done, check out our YouTube on Manitoba Ag. Here's another group of the extension specialists that are also available to help you with your questions. And so if you have questions throughout the week or throughout the growing season, get a hold of these people. They're definitely capable of helping you with any issues you may be seeing in the field. And join us next week, May the 6th, for our next edition of CropTalk. And there's our 1844 number, as well as our Manitoba Ag email address if you've got questions as well. So, Lori, I think we've answered all the questions, or was there anything we missed? I'll check once before we shut her down for the day.
No, I don't see any new questions.
Great. Thanks, Lori, and thanks for everybody for joining, and we'll see you next week.